One of the first videos that I ever made on this channel was a video describing the different forms of leftism, and it turns out there was actually quite a gap in the market, so to speak, for that type of video on YouTube, because it's got about 13,000 views now and still going. However, watching back at that video, I've realised that, I already knew at the time when I started my channel I didn't really know nearly as much about socialism as I do now, and that the things I presented in that video were either quite bare bones, or just not really that accurate. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to kind of remake that video, but going through more different types of Marxism, giving a lot more detail on the different types of Marxism, and hopefully just being more accurate. And also I'll be able to link to other videos that I have made now to explain certain concepts I talk about in more detail. So without further ado, let's get going. So let's start with Marxism. Marxism is a theory for analysing history and class society. Marxism heavily developed the labour theory of value, which is an economic model for capitalism, which says that labour, as well as nature, is the source of all wealth in society. I've made a video going over the basics of that here, if you want to go watch it, it's pretty good. But also, if you do want to learn quite a bit more about the labour theory of value, there's Capitalism 101's playlist, so I actually link at the beginning of my video there. Marxism is quite heavily based around the idea of class struggle, the conflict of interest between two different classes in society, be it slave and slave master, lord and serf, worker and capitalist. Marxism said that it is class struggle that drives history and leads to the formation of new societies to remedy the conflicts in the old ones. For a slightly more in-depth explanation of class struggle, here's a video going over that. However, all new forms of society that have emerged from class society have only formed new class societies. Marxism poses that the next step forward from capitalism is socialism, the first society where the ruling class are made up of the majority of people in society, and therefore the first class society that will begin the withering away of all class structure, which will eventually lead to communism, a stateless, classless, currencyless society. In socialism, the means of production, that being factories, offices, etc., workplaces in general, are owned collectively and democratically by the workers themselves working there, as opposed to today with an employer who owns and runs the means of production as he sees fit, without even having to necessarily work there themselves. Now here's a video explaining the workings of socialism in contrast to the workings of capitalism. Lastly is the Marxist concept of the state. The state, by Marxist definition, is a set of tools and apparatus used by one class to oppress another. For instance, knights were used to keep the serfs in check under feudalism, just like the police are for the workers today. The state and class society are intertwined, they're codependent and form one another. Under socialism, the working class take control of state apparatus in their own interest, as opposed to the interests of the capitalists like we have today. As socialism leads to the end of class society, it also leads to the end of the state. As if the state is a tool of class struggle, then if there are no classes, then it loses its purpose altogether. For a video going on a lot of detail on the Marxist view of the state, check out here. What really separated Marxism from all forms of socialism and communism before it was that Marxism was the first thing to take a scientific approach to the ideology. It analysed the development of history and class society to make the conclusion that not only was capitalism a necessary precursor to socialism, but that socialism naturally evolved out of capitalism inevitably. Other forms of socialism, what would be called utopian socialism, simply set out to just establish socialism at random in select areas without any of the pre-existing material conditions required for socialism in the first place. Now that we've gone over the basics, we can really get into the extensions of the ideology. Leninism is one of the main extensions of Marxist theory. What really made Leninism important was its adaptation of Marxist theory to suit the experiences of Russia under the Tsar, during the First World War, and after the Revolution, much like how Marx and Engels had adapted their theory to suit the experiences of the Paris Commune. From these experiences, Lenin put forward that the dictatorship of the proletariat, the workers' state apparatus, should be formed through democratic centrism, as well as with the Vanguard Party, a group of the most class-conscious individuals at the time, to help guide the workers' revolution towards socialism. This Vanguard Party could be relied on to make quick decisions at the time, which democracy may take too long to come to a conclusion for, which was very important at the time due to the fact that Russia was fighting a civil war against fascists. Lenin also gave contributions to the theory behind imperialism, which was mainly able to be done due to the experiences of the First World War. In this sense, Leninism is not merely just copy-pasting the ideas of the Vanguard Party or imperialism into the modern context, but it's using the same methods that Lenin used to adapt Marxist theory to be able to analyse the main pressing issues of our modern context. Rosa Luxemburg was a German revolutionary around the same time as Lenin, who criticised the Bolsheviks for what she considered to be authoritarian tendencies and the concentration of centralised authority. Luxemburg instead proposed what some may call Libertarian Marxism, having decentralized worker councils for each respective industry across the nation. It is often thought that this proposal was only really applicable to first world countries at the time like Germany, due to the fact it was one of the most industrialized countries in Europe at the time, while Russia had just been through a First World War, a revolution, and a civil war. Though they had ideological differences, both Lenin and Luxemburg were extremely sympathetic to each other's struggles. Unfortunately, while Lenin's revolution secured itself, Luxemburg's never managed to properly seize state power due to the fact that it never properly gained the support of the army. Besides her political contributions though, Luxemburg also expanded the idea of Marx's theory of capital accumulation, as this was something that was never properly completed due to Marx dying too early to complete his works. Having led a revolution, proposed alternatives to organising a socialist state to her Russian counterparts, and on top of that, contributing heavily to Marxist economic theory, Rosa Luxemburg can only be described as an amazing woman. Marxism Leninism is an extension of Leninism and is the ideology that Stalin claimed to work under. It is mostly specific to the conditions of Russia at the time, for instance collectivized farming. However, one of the more general contributions to socialist theory it gave would be the idea of socialism in one country. As international revolution had failed, leaving Russia isolated, many considered the progress of socialism in Russia to be considerably halted. However, when Stalin took power, he began to construct what he called socialism in one country. Marx and Lenin both predicted revolution to happen worldwide, or at least to happen in enough leading countries to naturally spread to other countries much like capitalism had. It was Stalin who first proposed the idea that socialism could first be built in one country and then spread to other countries. Central planning was heavily used in the USSR under Stalin as there was no private enterprise in Russia at the time. Yet without this private enterprise, Russia went from being a third world semi-feudal country to one of the superpowers of the world. Furthermore, the USSR managed to spread socialism across most of Eastern Europe and establish the Soviet satellite states, and in a sense spread socialism out of the one country as Stalin had intended. If you want to learn more about Marxism Leninism, I'd highly recommend checking out the Finnish Bolshevik because he knows tons more about this stuff than I do. Trotskyism is another extension of Leninism, which mainly attacks the USSR and the idea of socialism in one country, saying that socialism must always be international from the start if it is to succeed. Trotsky claimed that the USSR was a degenerated workers' state and was stifled by bureaucracy, giving rise to a new ruling class which effectively owned the means of production through the system of central planning. He said this was because that after international revolution had failed and Russia was isolated, it was forced to rely on ex-Tsarist bureaucrats in order to run its economy, as there were not enough literate workers at the time to replace these bureaucrats and create a proletarian bureaucracy, which would inherently fade away over time. He said that then Stalin was able to become the figurehead of this newly formed bureaucratic class and take power after Lenin's death. For this reason, Trotsky emphasized that the revolution must always be international if it is not to suffer the same fate as the USSR. Trotsky also developed theories on how to transition directly from feudalism to socialism, and while these were important at the time due to places like Russia still being semi-feudalistic, having an overwhelming majority of peasants, they're not really as relevant today. If you want to learn more about Trotskyism though, I'd highly recommend checking out Pro-Socialism, because again, he knows a lot more about this than I do. Maoism is an extension of Marxism Leninism. Its theories mainly deal with third world countries and their developments towards socialism. In countries with underdeveloped infrastructure, there are many places that basic services like transportation or healthcare can't reach. Maoism proposes that the workers of these societies come together and form their own worker-run services for the community, allowing the community to organise around these services and rally for socialism. It is when the already established government in this country starts to intervene, usually for corporate interest, that the workers then have a justified reason to defend themselves and fight back against the government. Maoists also usually claim that there is very little or no revolutionary potential at all in first world countries, due to the privileged lifestyles that first world workers enjoy at the expense of third world workers. Titoism is an extension of Leninism, which attempts the socialism in one country, but with the use of markets instead of central planning. It is essentially a full worker cooperative economy, but with a dictatorship of the proletariat. Titoism that says that once socialism has been spread internationally, the use of markets will no longer become needed and they will wither away, much like the state. This is what was practiced in Yugoslavia. However, because they were crushed, there was never any chance for this type of socialism to spread internationally. Anyway, that has been a quick overview of the many different kinds of Marxism that are out there. There are more, for instance left communism, however, due to that being both vague and me not really knowing a huge amount about it, I decided to leave that out. But if you do want to learn more about those ideologies or what the ones I've talked about today, just best advice I can give, really, besides watching YouTube videos, just read a book. You know, just go and ask what are the best books to learn, read for those specific ideologies, and you'll find something. You'll find something good. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have any questions at all about what I've said, just leave a comment down below. I'll most likely get to you. But for now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.